My parents went through the war and lived through poverty. Like my dad grew up in India, like he was born in India. My mom lived through poverty in China. Both my family grew up in poverty and on their own efforts and also luck and so on and so forth. Like I would say, like you and I, just based on what you just said, is that we heard the stories, but we saw the success of how someone who overcame those hardships. I don't know if you did, but I didn't personally experience these hardships my parents went through. I know kind of maybe going out different topic, but I'm talking about my kids, right? Like, let's face it.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't live through any hardship that my parents lived through. My kids definitely is not living through any hardship, right? But what I do feel like kind of bad for, right? It's like you try to teach it, but it's not firsthand knowledge anymore, right? Because they didn't go through me. Like, you know, so I think this is why this episode is such an important element. It's like, how do we not only how to manage our setbacks ourselves, but how do we teach that to our kids and the next generations around how to handle these setbacks? Oh man, Jim. It's been a hell of a week, hasn't it? It's one of those things, I think, when we are living life and enjoying life. It's the cumulative things that are going on in our lives that no one ever talks about, and no one has the video or the experience of what we're actually going through. And social media projects the highlight reel, the goods, the best of the parts, but no one, you know, that one split second, they don't see the other, 23
the
hours.
Happily ever after syndrome,
Yeah, exactly.
Right? The happily ever after syndrome, where it's like, hey man, you make the decision and it lives, you live happily ever after, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny. And I think this is why we're going to have the conversation today. I mean, you brought up this topic around managing setbacks. And I would imagine anybody who's listening or watching these podcasts, including ourselves here, they've gone through any life, any part of life, no matter how old you are, you must have had some setbacks in your life. I think if you didn't have setbacks, I think, I don't know, I would venture to say that I actually feel sorry if you didn't have any setbacks, because it
would be like a sheltered life, right? Because fundamentally the human experience means there are going to be setbacks. And that process of setbacks, enduring, learning, picking yourself up, keeping going again, that's the human story. That's pretty much what life's all about, really, in terms of any area.
But yet, setback, and even in the word, right, sets us backwards. That statement, that feeling, I'm sure all of us have gone through. But in the moment, like, it's easy for us to I want to be really clear on this, like, as we talk about this type of things on how to manage and what to do and some of the strategies that has maybe helped us get through setbacks. In the moment, though, of any setbacks, it's uncomfortable and it sucks and you're in deep pain most of the time. And the reason why it's a lot easier to talk about it now, because it's usually done in hindsight, and we're actually not in it currently, unless there's something going on with you currently. Like, most of the stuff that we're going to talk about is usually from the past and past experience. And so, I think the reason why I think it's important to talk about is, number one, we need to be aware that there are strategies that can help you. Two, also recognize that these strategies need to be repeated in your head and acknowledged and be aware of, so that you can actually apply it in the appropriate manners when it does happen. Because oftentimes when the setback does happen, your emotions are so high and it makes it very difficult to extrapolate that knowledge you might have gained from a podcast like this and bring it to the forefront to actually activate it. So what I'm saying to you is, for anybody listening and watching this, is that, take it for whatever, the advice we give you today, but also, like, put some of it into practice immediately if you can, because that's when it will sink in. That will put into practice of all the things that are important, that sort of when the time comes, it's like you practicing jiu-jitsu, right? It's like you practice because you want to make it so like this when someone does attack you for real. And you can react. It's like muscle memory.
Yeah, look, that totally. And there's a saying in jiu-jitsu that says, it takes you 10,000 submissions to get to your black belt. And most people associate that with 10,000 submissions that you have on somebody else. But the reality is it's on you, right? So you get submitted 10,000
submission of myself.
Correct. No, not on yourself. Somebody else submits the daylights out of you. But the process, each and every one of those is kind of like equivalent to Edison's 1,000, light bulbs, or 10,000 hours, because fundamentally what you're looking at is a setback. You go, hey, gee, that didn't work too well. Next time I need to do this. So there's Einstein always used to say a definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome, right? And so that, to me, is what setbacks give you is, yes, there's the disappointment. Yes, when you're in it, it's painful. It's It challenges you. Everything is going to come up. All the stories you tell about yourself and what it means are all going to come up. You have to cycle through that, right? However,
All
there's an
comes out as like a
opportunity
split
if
second
you.
too.
What's that?
Is that all comes right at like 1 second and everything,
Yeah,
all
like
that stuff just comes at
it's
you.
like a pop-up screen.
Yeah.
That's it. It's like a pop-up screen that happens straight away, and you have to basically have the situational awareness at the time to go, okay, let's just pause. Let's hit pause. Let's cycle through the emotion. But what can I learn from this? And I think to me, that's the biggest gift in a setback quite often, if you allow it to be.
Yeah. And so let's maybe start talking about like why we have setbacks in the first place, right? So we already kind of touched upon like the importance of setbacks. I think, like you said, both of us are both agree. I don't think we need to dive too much into this, but setbacks are important development of our human growth and to make us better and stronger people. However, like I think one of the things that is important to recognize is like what maybe, I think we'll start the conversation here. Like what are some of the things that happens that create setbacks possibly. Okay. So I'll start here. Like, I think one of the main reasons that creates setbacks is the word expectation is that we set ourselves with certain expectations. And because of that expectation, and whether that be right or wrong, oftentimes it's like a higher expectation. Like I'll give you my example. We talked about this before we start recording. My house is being completed. It's supposed to be done by now, and I was supposed to moved in by now, and hence like. But as you can see, for those people watching, I'm still here in my Airbnb for the last 6 months, and because we had this expectation, it was supposed to be done in September, now October, and now November. It's like it's a pushback. It's another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks. So then, because we had that certain expectation, it's like it becomes like this thing like. It's never ending. It doesn't seem like it's ending. So it keeps that setbacks occur because the reality of life isn't matching to the expectation that we thought was supposed to happen.
Yeah. I was just going to say the Buddhists have quite often a saying that says pain is normal, suffering is, that's the difference. You have a choice in terms of, suffering is not compulsory. And a lot of the times it's the meaning or the interpretation or the outcome that you're talking about that creates a lot of the suffering. So particularly in Buddhist principles and in a lot of principles, New Age ones, they talk about the surrender. And the surrender process is about saying, okay, this setback is not me. It's not about me. It's not personalizing the setback and some failing or frailty within the person. It's basically go, okay, here's the scenario. How do I interpret it? How do I actually surrender to it, give it my best shot, and then surrender to the process? And I get what you're talking about with the house setback, Laurence, because a lot of the times it's human nature to go, okay, all right, this will go on till September. And then September comes and goes, and it's created a whole lot of stress for you. You go, okay, I'll push it out October. It's got to be ready by October. And it's not. And so it's part of it is managing your own expectations, but then also working through the emotional journey of what's coming up for you when those setbacks are coming along. There's two parts to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that personalization one because I mean that is so true. The more we personalize something, and obviously these setbacks affect us personally, but the more you invest emotionally and personally affecting it and making it seem like it's you, it's all on you, or this is like you make yourself a victim. Really, that's what we're doing, kind of thing. It makes it multiplies that pain and the suffering you're talking about, and that is an option.
So the two parts. Remember back in psychology when we used to do this, Laurence, when we were studying. And the psychologists talk about the internal locus of control and the external locus of control. So the internal locus of control basically says what factors are within your control that you can change that can have an impact, right? And so when you feel like you have autonomy, when you feel like you have control over a situation, any setback, you go, okay, well, I can adapt, I can handle that. But whenever there's factors outside of your control or there's the perception of permanence, i.e. this is always going to be like this, that's when it starts doing your head in. That's when it really starts having an impact on you over and above the setback. It's the multiplier effect that you're talking about. So I think it's really important. We'll definitely deep dive into some of the strategies specifically, but I think what effect a setback has to people can be different in different situations in terms of how they interpret setbacks or how they interpret challenges in life.
Well, I think that goes right to the point of like how your interpretation of the story you make up about the story you create of this from the setback will determine the life you're going to lead moving forward. So like I think
Yeah.
it's an important thing to talk about, right? Because if you take, like, let's say what you said about personalizing it. So if there's certain things that happen, let's say setback occurs, and you personalize it as like, oh man, it's on, I become the victim because it was on me, or because
Yeah.
I was, oh, I'm the
Yeah.
stupid one, or I'm always making these
Yeah.
mistakes
I'm
all the
less than,
time.
I'm not good enough, all those
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of
And
things.
you
Yeah.
create this
Yeah.
story, and it's just like, now you've just created a story that may or may not be true. Be clear on that. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, but it will change the trajectory of your life simply because that story becomes your reality. And that reality becomes your
Yeah.
real new expectation. And that new expectation, now you're going to find your brain is so smart in a way, but dumb at the same time. Because if you ask a certain question, like, why
Yeah.
am I stupid? Your brain will tell you all the reasons
Yeah.
why you're stupid, right? Because you asked the specific question.
That's right.
If you change the
Yeah.
question to why am I so brilliant, then your brain will search out for answers to answer that question. So if you set a certain expectation that, I'm stupid all the time, I lose money in every single deal I have, or, I'm just terrible at business. Yeah, your brain will create that bias in you, and then, show you all those evidence that moving forward, that why you're, to make sure that statement is actually accurate. But the problem is because it simply was a story you created at some point in your life.
Yeah, totally. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, I'll give a personal example. Like, the way I used to do life, particularly, was anytime there was a setback, there was like this brick wall, and I'd come up against a brick wall, and quite often it would be, one of the emotions for me a lot of times was frustration, right? So I've really had to cycle through what frustration meant and why that was the case. But my default always was ego and just take a longer run up, right? And I just repeat the same mistake constantly and just take a longer and longer run up, thinking that perhaps if I just muscle my way through this, I'll break down this brick wall. But you learn pretty quickly that the walls are pretty sturdy, and as time goes on, and maybe it's maturity that says, hey, dude, that wall is staying just as strong and you aren't getting, you're basically aging. I did
Just
exactly
be
what you
smarter
just
and go
said. Is
use the
I
door.
asked a different question. Yeah, pretty much, man. It's like, hey, man, is there another way through this? Oh, yeah, there's a door, there's a ladder. I can go around it. I don't have to bust through it. But when you're in it, sometimes you don't have
Yeah.
awareness to ask a different question. And for me, what was happening, and substitute with that brick wall is, you name it, that the wall represented, whether it was basically a setback in physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, it was the same approach. It was the same responsibility, the same response. And I had to do the work on myself to go, hey, dude, just keep doing the same thing. This is how it's going to keep working.
Well, I think
And
that's the human
sometimes
condition,
you
right?
need someone out in the blind spot. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the human condition is that you're gonna look for those things, and you're gonna keep on keeping
Yep.
on unless you get shown a different perspective. And that's why I think coaching is such an important element in everybody's life. The
Yeah.
coach is there. Like, how I define coaching, or at least the coaching that we do, it's like our coaching. It's about providing you a perspective that you couldn't see. Like, it's helping you see things
Yeah.
that you couldn't see yourself, hear things you didn't want to hear, and help you be the person that you've always wanted to be. There's certain things you just are built not to want to see because you don't want to
Yeah.
go and look at that, right? It's like,
Yeah.
and you don't want to hear it. So therefore, that's what a coach
Yeah.
does. And that shift in perspective, all of a sudden you see clearer, you hear things clearer, and all of a sudden that gives you that window of opportunity to, like, just go, okay, there's a different path,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's the beauty of having someone. It's someone who you can trust. I'm not saying it has to be someone who's hired, but you have to have, I think, I honestly believe everybody has to have someone to guide them through the
Yep.
narrow scopes of life. That's what I think our job is as a parent, right? Our parent, like, as a parent, I'm trying to, like, help my kids navigate through life. And as they're getting older, I'm trying to, like, I'm not there to, like, hold their hand anymore. Now it's more like I'm there to help them take their steps on their own, right? As they get older and older. And I think a parent is a coach, is to help you see through
Yeah.
those things, be shown that perspective.
Yeah.
And those small little 1% changes their entire life.
Yeah, because we're blinkered on a specific process and a path. And a lot of times we don't identify our own blind spots. And really, like you said, the magic and the difference all coaches have always played for me is that they highlight those areas for me. And they highlight these spots and say, have a look at what's going on here. I don't need to tell you something, because if you can work this out through this process and you suddenly come up with your own answer, you suddenly go, holy smoke, now I see it. As opposed to someone telling you what the answer is, that you may have a story about. I don't like people telling me what to do. It reminded me of my mum, dad, whatever, all those kind of things that can block you. So the process of setbacks is, I think, a really key and important situation and scenario is, what's the truth here? What's really going on here? How much is it is fabricated? How much of it is perceived? And how much is it real? Because once you get to the truth, you can start having change. You can have transformation the moment you get to core truth. And as a starting point, it's like, okay, here's where we're at. Really, this is what we know. Not any worse, not any better, but that here is what it is. What would you say to that, Lauren?
Yeah, I think it's that's the hard part, facing reality, right? And I remember, I think I'm pretty sure it was in Good to Great where they talked about the Stockdale paradox, right? And it was, it's basically, I'll quickly summarize for those people who don't know it, which is like John Stockdale, I believe that's his first name, was a POW in the Vietnam War. And, he was there, I believe he was one of the highest ranking, military, and that was captured. And he was there for 7 years from memory. And he survived, obviously. And when he was released, he did a whole interview with him, and they asked him, like, who were the ones that didn't survive? And he's like, oh, that's easy. He's at the ones who were the optimists. And you're like, what? And it's because he said, like, those optimists is like, they're the ones in the camp that would say, oh, don't worry, guys, we'll get out by Easter. Easter comes around. Don't worry, guys, we'll get out by summer. Don't worry, guys, we'll get out by Thanksgiving. And then by Christmas. And then when those expectations, again, that word expectation, comes around and doesn't happen, there's only so long they can go for. And so the optimists just basically gave up, and those are the ones that couldn't make it through. And he says that, he goes, the one that made it through is that, it goes, oh, who makes it through then? He said, well, the one that makes it through are usually two. They have two mindsets. One is that they have to have hope. Okay, so that's the important thing. They have to have hope, which is the optimistic side, right? They have to have hope that they will get through this, that this will end at some point. But the second thing they also have to have is they also have to face reality. They're a prisoner of war. This is the reality. They may be here for years and without, rescue. And that's the reality. And I think that second part is the hardest for most people. It's like, setbacks will happen, but it's like facing reality. Like, this is as bad as you think it is, right? And it's like facing that reality. Sometimes, like I said, we sometimes are a turtle where we just don't want to see it, don't want to look at it, don't want to hear it. And so we bury ourselves from it. And hopefully that it will kind of just go away. I think that happened for the last 2 years, isn't it? Like for a lot of COVID at the beginning, especially, it was like, no, like just 2 weeks, right? 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Right? And then when the reality sets in, like, this is going to be a long haul. And sometimes, like, we don't want to face it, or it could be an investment, right? Like right now we're in this high inflationary period of time, like things are, not looking great over the next couple of years, right? Not next couple of months. Like, it could be looking the next couple of years, possibly. I don't know. This is not financial advice or anything, but like, I mean, just to say the prediction is correct. It's like, but some people are like, no, I'm not going to look at it. I'm sure my investment will go up, and I'm not saying this is advice to do whatever with your investment, but it's actually, you got to understand this is the environment we're in. How do you navigate through that rather than hoping that I'm living in last year's environment and thinking that everything's going to go back to that.
I think you're spot on in terms of, and I always love the Stockdale paradox story as well, because it just highlights that the truism that has to happen, the reality of the situation, not any worse, any better. And I've got an extension of that, and I've got a reference for it specifically as well. So when Jim Collins talks about that in Good to Great, Tony Robbins talks about the scenario. It's very similar, where he basically says, look, you've got this scenario where you walk into your garden and you can say, no weeds, no weeds, no weeds, no weeds, and yet your garden's full of weeds. Or you can go, there's weeds in there, let's get these suckers out of here and get done. So that's the reality. That's basically practical application of that as well, which I think is, in a very funny way, highlights exactly what we're talking about. It's like, here's the reality of the situation. There are weeds. What are we going to do about that? Right?
Yeah.
And
I think that's where people got The Secret wrong. Right, like, you know what I mean, the book and the movie. And I think, and there's two camps, that I'm not saying like it or not like it. I was just saying, like, the problem with like a lot of people with The Secret was that the movie was that they just thought they just had to visualize it, and that was it. Forgetting the second part, which is what Tony Robbins says, is just because visualizing it, yes, that's like part one. You definitely got to know what you kind of want and put that into the universe and create. But you actually still have to take some action to it, right? It's not like, I'm gonna lose the weight. I'm gonna lose the weight. It's not just gonna melt off.
Yeah, correct. So they're the realities of it, and it's going to be a little bit morbid what I was going to use as an example, but you're right about the reality of the situation. I always remember my dad, my late dad, always had this capacity and spirit. Yeah, and I think that probably inspired me greatly in terms of my career direction, in terms of how I ended up studying to be a chiropractor in the first place. But he had this unwavering belief that his body had the capacity to heal no matter
Mm,
what. He'd say, listen, I'm just going to have a lie down, I'll get adjusted, I'll take care of it, and I'll be okay. And every time he was. And as he aged, he got to a point. I remember visiting him in the nursing home, and I looked at him, and he just looked at me. And he goes, "I'm actually not going to get over this, am I?" Because he had basically pulmonary scarring. He had a lot of trouble breathing, and he butted up against his own perceived view of optimism against the reality of the situation. And when they met each other, it was really painful and stressful for him because he just had this realization that my body's actually not going to recover from this. That's a really sad realization in place. But then he made peace with that, right? So that was the next setback.
yeah.
He could have denied it. He turned that scenario and went, okay, as painful as this is right now, that's a reality. I'm actually not going to get better.
Yeah.
What am I going to do in the time I have left, which was gradually, basically rapidly decreasing? How do I make the most of the situation? And he recorded videos for my kids with, wisdom passed down, those kind of things. So
that's great.
it can be really painful, but it's your decision in the moment to go, okay, how am I going to handle this, and who am I going to become as a result of this setback? That really defines where it goes from there.
That reminds me of my mother passing away last year, and sort of very similar situation. But I never knew. I don't know the answer to this, so but I'll go through the story. Very similar to your situation. Like when my mom, she was in Canada, and I was in Australia. We were in lockdown. I couldn't get out to see her, but she was diagnosed with cancer. It was quite rapid, and she was one. My mom, as funny as she is, like she's always been like this, but it got worse. I don't know. It definitely affected her brain a little bit, I think, but it's basically got to a point where she hates technology, right? So she hates Wi-Fi. She hates like any of that stuff. So she made my dad like turn off Wi-Fi. I couldn't even FaceTime her or Skype her and see her because she wanted me to call her landline. And so like I'll call the landline. That's fine, whatever. But I never got to see her. So all this time, like we're talking months here. And then finally, I think my dad maybe, or my brother sent a picture, and right there and then I'm like, oh my God, you just know, like, I don't know, Jim, like I'm sure you've been through this, but where you just see a person, you go, they're a shell of who they were. And there's just something physically changes. You go, this is not good. Like you can just see it. Like life is just not there. I've seen that twice in my life with someone close to my family, and you just go, this is not good. But my mom just kept on the phone, just kept on telling me like, everything's fine. I'll be good. And, she didn't want to do any medicine or anything like that. And she was really just focused on healing. But I can speak to my personal relationship with what you just said around, the reality. I basically flipped in my head. I'm like, the reality is I might never see my mom again, period. Like, that's the reality, because I was locked down, couldn't fly, couldn't get into the country, couldn't leave the country. And it's like, okay, like I could make it work. I can force it to happen, maybe like get some, but then like what's the detrimental effect and blah, blah, blah. Anyways, the whole point was I couldn't get there. And this is it. Like this could be at any moment. But I don't know if she fully accepted that internally, or she would. I mean, at the same time, she's smart enough to maybe know that, accepted that reality, but not say anything to me because she didn't want me to worry, right? So that's also a believable side of the story too. So I don't know. To this day, I don't really know. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But I guess the learning that I got from it is just that the reality thing. Like that's the reality I have to face, and we as humans have to. It's very difficult to face those realities. It's difficult. It's hard. We don't want to see it. But the fact of the matter is that if we don't face the reality, we're making judgments and making decisions that may not serve us. But if we face the reality, the decisions we make may actually help us create a better future.
Yeah.
Like what
totally,
your dad,
totally.
what your dad did. How's that? I mean, man, that's amazing. Like it's such an amazing thing, right?
Yeah,
For him to do those recordings and videos.
Very resilient stock too, Laurence. My dad for years would say, look, we haven't had as a society, you haven't had hardships that like we did. He was like product of basically post-war. He finished formal education in grade 3, right? The war broke out and never went back to school, right? The guy became a self-made millionaire through just grit and hard work, right? He literally busted himself, but that was the tenacity. And I think that's the part of me that learnt to just drive and go harder and harder. I was modeling that behavior, right? But he always used to say, and I observed this a lot with a whole lot of post-war migrants who I saw around COVID, when they handled it really well, to be honest, in my observation. Some of these people handle setbacks. They're going, this whole thing, what do you think? I've got jars of olives, pickled jars, and 15. Like I've been preparing for this my whole life, right? And everybody who's just like got one packet of spaghetti or something like that, they were like caught out, right? But you go into a bunker, man. It's like 6 months worth of food they've got at any one time because they were prepared through post-war, through the war. So my dad lived through the war, and so consequently that impacted his psyche and his capacity to go, you cannot expect the unexpected, right? And so plan for tomorrow, live for today, but have a contingency, have something, have a buffer, whatever it is, and the buffer could be food, cash, whatever, and that's how he went about life. And so that's the meaning he took through.
It's so interesting to think about that. Like you think about your dad. My parents did the same thing, right? My parents went through the war and lived through poverty. Like my dad grew up in India, like he was born in India. My mom lived through poverty in China and Hong Kong. Like so it's like both my family grew up in poverty and rose to the ranks, and on their own efforts and also luck and so on and so forth. We'll get into another podcast another time. But when I think about that is
luck is when opportunity meets preparation, Laurence.
Exactly. So, but like you think about you and I, like I would say, like you and I, just based on what you just said, is that we were able to see the hardship from at least. Actually, we didn't see it. I think we heard the stories, but we saw the success of how someone who overcame those hardships, but we never experienced it. Personally, I don't know if you did, but I didn't personally experience these hardships my parents went through, and I was able to do it. But like, I really kind of think about this. And I know we're kind of maybe going out a different topic, but I'm talking about my kids, right? Like, let's face it, right? I didn't live through any hardship that my parents lived through. My kids definitely is not living through any hardship, right? And so, but what I do feel like kind of bad for, right? It's like they don't. I don't know. Like you try to teach it, but it's not firsthand knowledge anymore, right? Because they didn't go through me. So I think this is why this episode is such an important element. It's like, how do we not only how to manage our setbacks ourselves, but how do we teach that to our kids and the next generations around how to handle these setbacks? What do you think about that?
Well, totally. Because what you're talking about is a really good example. Like my kids are the same, right? They're never going to experience like what my parents did. And they're never going to experience what I did as well, too. So we're fortunate. They've had opportunities and situations that I didn't have, right? And not judge, but I can't compare their experiences to mine and expect that they understand that, because that's not their reality, right? But what I do know is the setback and the human experience of setbacks is what I sought to teach them. So we had certain scenarios where we went, okay, you may not have economic setbacks that other people had. You may not live through a war, who knows. But what I want you to do is I want you to understand the process of working through hard things, And so whenever our kids, we always had the condition that, look, you can do whatever, but you're going to play formal sport. I want you playing sport. I want you doing some kind of martial art. And I want you to do that to work through the challenges. And I'm not ever going to talk to the coach to get you on the team. You're going to have to work on it on merit. And I believe in meritocracy a lot. I believe in personally preparing kids rather than protecting them. Because one day I'm not going to be around and I can't protect them. So I wanted to be able to help them find their own personal power through challenge, setback, and struggle, so that then could be applied to other areas. Because I knew it wasn't going to be in the economic way that you and I were talking about, but it's going to be somewhere else. And once you learn that as a life skill, that's transferable.
The argument, the other side of the argument, or adding to what you just said, which is 100% true, I believe, which is like the human condition and the human psychological and physiological reaction and response to stress is going to be the same for our kids than it was for us, and as for our parents. The only difference was the environment and the circumstances that created that physiological response to setbacks or fear or anger or whatever is just a different trigger. I truly 100% believe that the emotion, though, like the subjective emotions and triggers and the physiological responses to that, is it going to be exactly felt the same way, but just in a different context.
Yeah, totally.
It's not one better than the other because the response is the same.
Yeah, totally same principles, right? And this is when they, in all these studies about flow states, they actually look at people and say, how do you get into flow? That state where you are in the zone, things are effortless, you're indefatigable. Well, what they found, right, is that if your skill set is met by something that doesn't demand too much of you, you end up being bored. You don't actually get the best out of yourself. So if you've ever had a certain skill set and you played in a team that was a lot less skilled than you were, you pretty much default to the level of the team. You suddenly go, why am I playing so badly? Right? When you actually are playing against a competition or in a challenge that's way above where you are, that you get squashed, well, that suppresses your spirit as well. And that smashes you. And that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But flow has been shown that if its challenges is a little bit above where your skill set is, where you have to grow into that to embrace all parts of you to take on that challenge, that's when you get into flow. That's when you grow. And that to me is the whole process of the setbacks and graduated challenge that'll help you get better. It's kind of the resistance that you use in weights, right?
Yeah, it's the fine line between boredom and anxiety. And I believe that flow state is 4%. Like I think they actually measured it. It's about 4%
it doesn't have to be huge. Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and what I mean by 4% is like it's the challenge has to be about 4% more than what you're already capable of doing. So it's like 4% is not a lot, but it's enough, right? And why 4%? I think that's a really important number to think about, is because it's just enough where you're not going to make it, but it's not unbelievable that you're not going to make it enough. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's like, I mean, if I play basketball, it's like, I go, okay, now go slam dunk the basketball and to win $1 million. Like, it's not believable because I've never even touched the freaking rim. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, that's too unbelievable. So it's like that. So, but the 4%, that flow state is to get to that flow state. Like all the athletes are doing is challenging themselves about 4%. And they because they may or may not make it, but because they tried, their level of achievement is just inching closer and closer, and that's how they get into that
and the times that they don't make that's the setback.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
So remember I can't remember which episode it might have been. One of these ones I went, okay, we're going to be controversial in terms of everybody gets a prize. I think I might go for it here. When our kids were growing up, they exhibited a lot of sporting talent, right? And I was fortunate. That was my pathway. I don't think I've ever mentioned it to you. This is the pathway that I had acceptance in Australia as a migrant kid through sport.
Right.
So I worked out pretty quickly that, hey, you'll get accepted if you excel at a sport, because you can be different culturally. We could segregate you for everything else. But if you can swing a bat, kick a ball, or punch harder than anybody else, you're in. Right. So I worked that out very quickly. Right. That was just a survival mechanism that I had. But when my kids were experiencing, were growing through the ranks, I knew that at some point they were going to come up against challenges with adults if they were going to play cricket. It's like, so one of our eldest sons was playing cricket, an exceptionally talented guy. And I knew that at 12, 13, 14, which is the same age that I broke into senior one as well, I was bombarded with antagonism, basically intimidatory play to scare the kid out of it. And I developed this strength, right, within me mentally. So I helped prepare my kid for that, and my eldest son. And so I started, preparing him for it and started challenging him. And I started, even in the backyard, in the nets, how we'd play cricket, which is the game of cricket, and started bowling deliveries aimed at his head. Now, you might look at this and go, geez, you're up for Parent of the Year award. But it wasn't that. It was about preparing him for that process. And guess what happens? He's 14 years old. He breaks into a senior team. He walks out to bat. The first ball he gets is a bouncer at his head. And at 14, he hits the guy over the fence. Why? Because he was prepared for that. And to me, that showed me I couldn't protect him, because if he hadn't been prepared for that situation and the ball came and he wasn't prepared, he would have been hit. Whereas in that scenario, he was ready because he was prepared.
Well, exactly. And I think that's the challenge that we have to put ourselves. And yeah, I get why that could be an unpopular thing. I mean, I'll share my side of things. I remember, it's as simple. It's not even in sport. It was like, I think it was like in Monopoly, and like these kids games, we're playing Monopoly or Risk or one of those type of games. I'm like, I'm pretty competitive, but I'll let my
Yeah.
kids kind of like I'm talking like when I say I want to let my kids like win, I'm talking when they were like 6, right? So I'm not talking like now, but
Yeah.
like I used to just
Yeah.
like let them, have a
Yeah.
little bit of fun, but like I'm still gonna win. I'm gonna beat you, and in chess or whatever. I might,
100%.
and it's
Yeah.
like I know most people go like, "There's no way," like you're so cruel. I'm like, oh, but at the same time, like I rather
Okay.
them learn
Thank
how
you.
to lose, like
Yeah. Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
upset with dad when they're younger
Yeah.
because if I let them win, let them win, let them win, and all of a sudden I crush them later on, it's
Yeah.
going to be harder,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, mate, I totally agree. I'm so glad you said that because I used to do that too, right? I used to actually, my wife Bettina go, can't you just let them win, every now and again? I go, listen, if they know that I'm dogging it so that they can win, they're going to be angry at me. And the proudest moment that my kids had was when they surpassed me. And they've surpassed me in so many areas now, it's not funny. I don't care. I don't mind that. My ego was never about my ego. It was about helping them through that process. Now, I know it's going to challenge a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
This statement, but I'm okay with that because what I was trying to help teach our kids was, hey, anything that you have, your esteem is linked to the fact that you achieve this on your own. It's not on me, it's on you. And imagine the skill sets and the esteem and the worthiness and the feelings of feeling good enough when they realize, hey, I lost and I lost and I learned something. I came back and I won. Ultimately, that helps them more.
Yeah.
That it's not about a game. It's not about a game of Monopoly and beating your dad at it. It's not
Yeah.
about hitting a ball over the fence for 6. It's about what did I learn as a result of all the setbacks and all the challenges that I faced, and who did I become?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like when in the moment, like I love that moment when they, I think it was chess, say, when they beat me in chess, like
Yeah,
fair and square, and you're like, okay.
yeah,
You know what I mean? It's like, and they have that
yeah,
good feeling because they know it hasn't been an easy years for, losing to
yeah,
dad all the time. And then finally they overcome
yeah,
you. And it's
yeah,
like, yeah, it's, I think that's a great feeling to have. And it's playing the long game.
yeah,
It's challenging, but yeah, it's not a popular thought process. And, but I think the reality is what we're trying to do. Like our intention isn't to win. Our intention is to make our kids better
yeah,
by making sure that,
yeah,
of course, we're trying to protect them, but at the same time, we're also making sure they protect for them in the
yeah,
future, not just in that moment of their feelings
yeah.
at that
Yeah,
moment, that
and
time.
totally. I don't throw them to the lions, right? I always have tried to do is actually teach them the life skills that are helpful along the way. So there's 2 moments that I found Laurence kids were really, really happy about themselves. Is number 1, when they can beat mum or dad on a board game or a game, and number 2, when they surpass them in height. That's kind of like their proudest moments. Have you ever noticed that? Where they're so happy with that?
Oh, my daughter's very, very close. Very, very close. We're talking like
Yeah.
half an inch
I
now.
saw I saw photos of her. I
Yeah, man.
thought, whoa, she's getting closer. She'll be challenging you very soon if she hasn't
Yeah. Oh,
already.
she's been challenged. She's been flirting with that line for about a year now. She just stopped growing and the last year, and she's just like, better, she's there with mom, with Karen. She's the same height, but like I got about half an inch, and my hair helps too. That little
Yeah.
bit extra.
Yeah, I luck out in that one, Laurence. I
Yeah.
can't. I just got to basically just rely on natural height because
Yeah, well,
I've got no.
you got me on natural height by a mile. So
Yeah, that's the go. Hey, the other thing I wanted to mention with regard to setbacks, right, is we talked about the accepting the situation,
hmm.
and have you ever come across that tool, the whole above the line, below the line, as
Yeah,
a
but do
management
remind
tool?
me. I think I
Yeah, right. I love this so much, and a lot of times, anytime we do work with teams or culture or organizations, we set this as a framework because, and we incorporated this in our family. These are kind of agreements we have with a lot of groups that are involved in. So, if you imagine you've got a straight line, right, and you've got a section of 3 or 4 words above the line and 3 or 4 words below the line. Right. So below the line effectively is non-empowering states or behaviors.
hmm.
And so anytime a problem comes up, people go to denial, justification, blame, and reasons or excuses, right? So fundamentally, as a mindset, when people go under the line, they're not actually setting themselves up for change. They're not actually setting themselves up for a lot of what we talked about. What did I learn in this? And above the line, and you can really look into this. We've done a lot of work with this with a lot of our teams. It's quite often a change. It totally changes how people go about life. Right. So above the line, you've got things like you take ownership, you take accountability, you focus on results, those kind of empowering things. And through the process of questions, it brings you above the line. So we always had an agreement whenever there are setbacks. Okay, you might be disappointed, you might be bummed out, really disappointed that things worked out the way they are. We'll allow you a certain amount of time underneath the line. Right. You might feel the pity party, you might feel sorry for yourself, you might want to blame or whatever, but your onus is to get above that line really quickly. Mm-hmm. So what ownership can you take? What did you learn? What can you be accountable? How are you going to use these results for something different? Yeah. And to me, that's a really practical tool to change the whole direction of a setback into something more empowering.
Yeah. So what I love about that is it's two things. Number one, it's the ability to be able to allow someone to go through the human process of emotions and then learn to like feel it through rather than just ignore it and just battle it and go like, I'm going to be above the line right off the bat. I think it's important because that's natural. We have to feel those feelings so we know what that feels like, right? Like this whole podcast.
Yeah, because if you truncate those feelings, if you truncate those feelings, it becomes a wound. So it's not actually, it doesn't allow you to cycle through that process.
Exactly. It'll just come out somewhere else later on, right? And so, it's about being able to allow to process that feeling. But there's a time limit, not a time limit, meaning like there's no time limit for any, depending on the setback, of course, but there's a certain moment where you have to be able to make that mental switch and going, okay, enough is enough, and we're going to start moving above the line. And that's something like I try to teach my kids with, like, especially with my son, like oftentimes, he just gets into this state, and he's going to hear about this maybe like 10 years from now. So hopefully, he won't be too embarrassed about it. But like he gets into the state where, when something goes wrong, he just like his whole body posture is like, oh, like he's 11, like, he's a young kid, but he makes the whole world know, like he becomes a victim. And as a dad, and as how I think and how you think, it's like, it's one of the worst feelings you can see, because it's like, oh my God, like how, like why, like, but I know what he's doing, and I know but it's like, okay, I'm going to let him go through that process. But at some point, I'm going to have to like, okay, enough is enough. Time to snap out of it. And he, he doesn't do it every time, but he's getting way better at it now. Like he's just getting way better to like, okay, I just got to like, now it's about changing that posture. Now it's about changing my mindset around this, because inevitable, like the thing that's happening to you that caused you to feel that's not going away, right? It's like that thing is the thing. And so therefore, you're going to have to learn to like figure it out, to navigate through that environment or situation. So being in that posture is really not going to help you. So like, I love that whole thing is it's about like, how do you get up above that line now? Because at some point, like staying below the line is really not going to help you navigate this. In fact, it makes it a lot harder and worse.
Yeah. And at an intellectual level, that's a great tool. How do you teach it to 11-year-old? That's a really hard tool, and particularly with boys too, who generally will shut down. Part of the reason why we used to, as a family, go to football games every week was to keep that connection and bond around one thing so that we could keep dialogue going. And it was really formative in those years. And I always found it was just amazing. So, our boys would want to go off and do their own thing, but we'd congregated on a Saturday afternoon watching a game, and we all agree that our team was hard done by, or our team was all that kind of, but it kept dialogue and communication going. And it was so invaluable, particularly for boys in that stage where they just shut down. They don't communicate as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I remember once, because our boys have always been around personal growth, they kind of know you're sometimes trying to do it when you're trying to support them. And and so you've just got to be authentic about it without trying to have an agenda. And I remember once we had to drive from Melbourne out to this game. It was like 120K away game. And my son was the goalkeeper. And it was like 8 o'clock in the morning in the middle of winter. It was raining, cold, and he was the goalkeeper. And our team got thumped 20-0. And my son, he was the goalkeeper, and he was voted MVP that day on his team, because had he not stopped 30 goals, they would have got absolutely done even further. So the ball did not go on the opposition in their half. So their goalkeeper, basically the kids died of hypothermia. They haven't given him cold drinks because he's doing nothing for a whole game, right?
He just stood there.
And so the drive home was very interesting, where they're going, this kid at that stage is like, okay, my esteem is linked to, and as a goalkeeper, when you're getting 20 goals in the onion bag, your esteem gets affected no matter what. So I've gone, how do I help him? How do I help him? How do I help him? So I've turned around and said, you know what, Sebastian, you played a really great game. You know, it was awesome to watch. You stopped so many goals. Yeah, I know you copped 20. You know, you learned so much. Your skills as a goalkeeper went up so much this game. That other goalkeeper, he's no better today than he was last week. Seriously. And he's just looked at me and gone, thanks for the pep talk, Dad. I really appreciate it, but we got done 20-0. Get real. You know, so, you know, that was me just trying to reframe it.
Yeah,
But,
yeah, yeah.
you know, like it's harder with boys, man, at that age. They'll call you out big time if they think you're trying to be have an agenda or something like that. And
Oh man, we got materials to come as my 11-year-old boy is going to be starting growing up, and as we navigate through his teenage and puberty life for sure.
Yeah, Laurence, I tell you what's really helpful is sometimes the most magical moments with them, particularly boys. If you try and initiate a conversation, they're not going to want to do it. How was school? Yeah, they won't give you much. But if they've played hockey or basketball or soccer or footy or whatever, and you've picked them up and you're in the car waiting for them, and they sit down, then you're both looking ahead. Oh, you're looking ahead, they're looking ahead. They'll sometimes open up with gold. They'll open up with what's going on for them. They'll open up with their fears, doubts, uncertainty, and they're magical moments.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I agree.
You can't turn them on and off or tap like you want as an adult. So that's what I learned. Hey, I've got this great tool. It's called above the line, below the line. They're like, I don't care. We got done 20-0.
Yeah.
All right. But when they're ready, it's magic.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to those moments for sure, and that's the thing. Like with magical moments and setbacks in people's life, it's exactly the same, right? It's like for everybody, it's like you have this ability to be able to have that. You know, you can make that into a really great lesson for you, or a great experience that you can learn from. And for me, I don't know what some lessons that you learned from your setback, but for myself, it's that whole thing about, you mentioned about locus control. Like I recognize that there are three things, how I kind of put into three buckets in any given moment in time. Which is one bucket is that there are things that I have full control over. Okay, like any decision I make that's in my control, that's in my control. Then the second thing is things I have an influence on, which means I can influence it, but I don't actually have the fullest control over that. So which means for example, I might have influence on you, Jim, over what I tell you, but I have no control of what you're going to do next, right? I can influence maybe, with words or communications, but I can't force you to do something because I don't have full control. I can control what I say or do at any given moment, but I can't control how you decide. But I may have influence.
Yeah.
But then there's the third element, which is the most important, is there are things in this world that we have no control over. The weather, the environment that we live in, government decisions, whatever. Like all these things are outside of our control. And if you put the things that you're dealing with situation in either one of those three buckets, I think it's important once you start to recognize that there's hope, you're worrying about things that's not within your control, have no control over whatsoever. You're just wasting your time. And it's way better to just focus on the things you can control and influence. And if you spend most of the time doing that, then life is good.
Yeah. And Laurence, I reckon I'm going to finish up now by basically taking what you just said exactly and saying that's the big thing that I've learned over time, is focusing on what's within my control and what's outside of my control. So if it's outside of my control, the learning has been surrender. That's the learning. It's been surrender the process. If it's within my control and I've had a setback, I ask myself three questions. Did you give your best? What did you learn in the setback? And is this still a priority and important to you? And out of those three questions, I will work out how do I regroup, reload, or whether I need to change that or let that go because it no longer serves me anymore. And that's the byproduct of running into many walls at high speed over a long time, and then eventually getting to the point going, there's got to be another way, man. I can't keep doing this the same way. What question or what thing that I need to do differently? So that's probably my takeaway out of this for people as well.
Well, John Wooden, one of the great basketball coaches, has always said that a loss is never a loss unless you didn't learn a lesson from it or something to that effect. And I think that's exactly what life is about. And I think these setbacks are not losses if you learn something from it. It's a lesson, and that's the L. And I think that if we can kind of move through life with minimizing the losses and increasing our lessons, and then also translate those to wins, you're going to have a great life. And I think that's, it's hard to play the long game in the moment, as we discussed, but, navigate through your emotions. And the quicker you're able to get above the line to transform it into a lesson so that you can go after your next win, I think that is the name of the game. And if you get to do that for the rest of your life, you now get to have an enjoyable life. And that, I feel like, it's a
Yeah.
good life to live. And that's what we're trying to, help everyone
Yeah.
kind of create.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed our podcast recording today, Laurence, and thank you once again. Love hanging with you with these podcasts, and look forward to our next one next time.
All right, guys, everybody. So you were here on YouTube and on every podcast platform that you might be listening to. So please, if you can give us a review, that'd be great. Give us a thumbs up, or either leave a comment, and most importantly, just share this stuff with someone who you think might need to hear this message and this podcast. So I look forward to it. Until next episode, Jim, we'll speak to you then. Take care.